All right. Happy New Year, everyone. Was it just a little bit of the sausage being made there? Um, all of you are on this call. I think most of you, save for one or two students, are all in your second semester. Is that right? I think that's right. What we're doing today is we are holding just simply a question and answer session just to clarify anything or any worries or concerns or questions or excitement that you may have about the 4 studio offerings. At the end of this call, Janice will stay on the line because Janice will talk through what we're actually doing to vote for what studio you'd like. So on the Moreau board, and I think accessible to all of you, have been descriptions of what the 4 option studios are. So option studios, basically this semester, you'll have a choice of what you want to take for your studio. The 4 professors leading studios this term are Thina, John, Joanne, and Chris. They're all on the call. I think you're familiar with everybody. The offerings are both on the Moreau board, and I don't know if they've been sent to you directly or not, but you've had access to them and hopefully have had some time to look through them and think about what you're interested in taking. Janice will talk through the process of voting. There's a link that I think Emma posted in the chat that should take you to the survey. So you'll be able to fill out what it is that you're interested in and rank things in order of interest. Every term we do our very, very best to give you your top choice or one of your top choices, and we'll do the same here. There's no guarantee that that will happen. However, provisionally, if you are getting your kind of lower choice this term, we do have a mechanism that puts you at the top of the queue for upcoming terms so that you get first choice later on, if that makes some sense. But I don't think there'll be a huge disparity this term, which is great. The last thing I'll say before I turn it over to everyone, what we're hoping to do is to have you post questions that you have in the chat, just because it's easier, one, for us to keep track of those questions, and 2, keep a record of them for individuals that may not be able to make this call. And if you have questions for John, if you could post those first, because John has a 2 o'clock meeting and he's going to have to jump off of this Zoom. So that was quite a lot. We're going to hit the ground running. I hope everybody had a good New Year. It's been a weird year so far already. Hopefully we'll just roll down the backside of this kind of crud mountain that we're on and kind of slide into Coolsville as we move forward. That's my wish. Okay, so barring any big issues, I am just going to open the floor. John, Joanne, Chris, and Thina, Happy New Year. Welcome. It's great to see you. Janice as well. If you could also monitor the chat and take point if questions start coming into you, just feel free to answer them and I'll do my best to mediate. All right. And we'll give it 5 minutes. If there are no questions, we'll just all go home. Turn off. So far, all is quiet. Well, 2 questions start coming in. John, where is your site going to be?
Okay. Am I mute? No. The site is on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and it's a small First Nations community called Anakla. It's part of the New Chalmouth. And it's the project is a quote unquote real project. I was approached by a friend who works for a environmental NGO who's working with them and suggested it might be a good subject for a studio, and it turned out to be a pretty good one. So yeah, so I've been cramming a lot of New Chalmouth Huayat knowledge down my brain to get out in front of you guys for the studio, because it's a community I've not worked with before. We'll focus on wood because there's a lot of wood there. They have access to a sawmill and lots of timber. So we'll explore that in some kind of focus.
Terrific. Chris?
The site is in central Vancouver near the CPR stroke Amtrak station. And it's an unusual block in that it has essentially two fronts to it. In the standard depth of a Vancouver block, where normally there would be a lane, there is now an emerging street. And then programmatically, what's interesting is it's near the site of the new St. Paul's Hospital, which for those of you who aren't familiar with Vancouver is one of these mega hospitals. It's going to be built probably over the next 10 years. They're in a preliminary planning stage now and getting permissions. And it will employ something ridiculous like 20,000 people. It will completely disrupt the demographics of that part of the city. And apart from the hospital itself, there's a number of ancillary buildings. So one of the buildings they have in mind, for instance, is a hotel, so that if you come from Kamloops and you have someone in long-term care, there's a place for you to stay and participate in the treatment of your relation or friend. And so the main project will be a freestanding building in that precinct. And as a warm-up, we're doing a series of projects in an infill site in that peculiar block. So it's, on the one hand, kind of gritty and urban. On the other hand, it's a freestanding building on a kind of greenfield site. So I think it's going to be a nice combination.
Great, thanks, Chris. Joanne and Thina, I'm going to have you really quickly talk about your sites, just so there's some equitability. The questions are starting to pop in. So Joanne, do you want to really quickly touch on where you're going to be? You're muted.
Thanks, Blair. The broader context for the studio is the southwest corner of the UBC campus. We're broadly situated between UBC Farm and Westbrook Place. It's a very interesting area. The curious thing, just very quickly, is that UBC Farm is rather hidden. You have to kind of find it. And much like the many new areas in Vancouver, the Westbrook Place, it's been developed over the last 5 years very rapidly. And it's a bit like the suburb on steroids. It's like big blocky buildings with lots of weird space between them. And so we're kind of this hidden space that's very rural right up against this kind of almost like a Whistler-like setting right here in Vancouver. So I think it'll be a fantastic site for us to work in this term.
I went to a wedding for 2 former Salis students at the UBC Farms, just like right before this whole thing happened. It was the most Sala thing I think I've done in a long time. Athena.
The site for the final project is going to be in an urban context. The specifics are still TBD. It depends a little bit on the cohort. So.
Okay. Questions are rolling in, but I've noticed that Chris and John are answering them on the chat. So continue to monitor those. I'll continue to fill airtime here if nobody speaks up. Okay, so all of you will be engaging projects that work on architecture, on buildings proper. That's one of the learning objectives for the term is the kind of actual tectonics and building making. As you move through the program, you'll notice that you'll be dealing with projects that seem to focus a little more on urban contexts and relationships to bigger urban relationships. This project it'll have some of that content in it. There'll be clearly, as you've heard from everybody speaking, relationships that you'll think about with the city, between the city and what you're designing, and also with the communities for which and for whom you're designing. But you should really be kind of feeling like you're working with actual building assemblies at a basic scale, kind of scale. You'll be thinking about circulation, relationships like that. Accessibility, some other things. So Chris has his hand raised.
I was just going to say that I don't know that it's clear in the 4 descriptions of our individual projects, but or individual thematics. But following on the back of the themes course that you've done in the fall term, one of the things that we're going to do is the first 4 Fridays of the term, one of the group is going to deliver not really a lecture, but a kind of presentation stroke seminar. And we've divided up a series of topics, which we think, if you think of them as less maybe history theory and more kind of applied design lessons. And so these should collectively, we're hoping that these 4 topics will give you a kind of leg over on how to take some of the historical theoretical things that you've been learning in themes and begin to draw those into your own design application. So I think it's one thing that wasn't necessarily deliberately stated in the earlier information, but it's important for you to realize that that's going to be part of the semester, and it's something that we've been working on collectively.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And that should be a real boon for everyone. There are increasing efforts being made to really kind of help all of you connect the dots between some of your course content and how they actually impact your thinking in a design studio. A little more synthesis to kind of demystify some of those relationships, because they do all relate, but also just to help build in all of you kind of the awareness, the knowledge, and the kind of feeling that you have the ability to actually draw from these other courses and apply what you're learning and you're thinking about in your design work. Okay, are some of the students enrolled in these studios further along in their degrees? If so, are there efforts to connect students from different years and encourage learning from our peers who may have more experience? Andrew, yes, but one of the things that's really changed with a kind of reworking of the curriculum and everybody's trajectory through it is that there's less verticality in the studios. So these used to be purely referred to as vertical studios because you get people from different years stacking up. Right now, the majority of you are still the same group that you were with in ARC 500. You'll just be mixing far more. There are a few of you, like I see Jeremy and some other students, hi Jeremy, who are more advanced. And of course, you will be interacting with those students. They'll be working next to you. So you will have that opportunity. It just won't, I think you'll find that you'll find more people in the same position that you are in the curriculum, if that makes sense.
I would also say that, you know, it's one of the intentions of the, excuse me, the Miro environment that you're able to interact in that world. But also as you work collectively on each of the exercises, of course, you'll be able to see what your peers who may be further along in the curriculum than you are have been doing with the same exercises that you're doing. And I guess the only other thing I was going to say is that just for everyone to note that each of the 4 sections has a kind of some version. There was some kind of pushback in one of the surveys recently saying that too much time spent on the kind of preliminary introductory exercises. And I think in general, the faculty feel that those are not, those are essential in a way to help get you tuned up to hit the road running when we get the larger projects going after 3 or 4 weeks in the term. So not to feel that those are irrelevant. They also offer a fantastic opportunity for your tutors to get a sense of what your skill set is and what your inclinations are as you move into the larger project. So I think that's important to understand.
In terms of seeing other students work, one of the projects we've been working on over break is coming up with some environment where all of you can tour and see what other students at other points and in other programs within SALA have been working on. So we used to do what was called an all school walk around at the end of each semester, where basically we'd plaster the walls. At first it was physical. We plaster the walls with everybody's work. And as a group, we'd walk through and just listen to what people in other studios were working on and talk about it and talk about the relationship of those studios to both the school writ large and also where we are in the world right now. Like, what do these studios mean in terms of how we engage the work of design, engage the broader community, those types of things. We're working on building a kind of, for lack of a better opportunity, a Moreau ecosystem that'll allow us to have a couple of events where we do present to each other and we talk, and hopefully at least John, Thina, Joanne, Chris, and I can debate ideas as you debate ideas, and we can have this sort of flat discussion of the project you did last semester. So it's not lost on us that there hasn't been this opportunity to see what the school's doing and kind of get a sense of that. And to be honest, having been on, I think, almost every review or close to every review, there was some really good work semester that I think is worth seeing and that everybody should be able to celebrate, talk about. So we're hoping that happens in the next couple of weeks. We're just scrambling to find a good way to put all of this together.
I have a question for John Bass. You mentioned that there is like an element with wood products and that there's like an access to a mill. How would that like influence, or how would that be like involved in the studio? Like, would we be designing the actual wood structure, like certain connections and things, or like how would that filter in?
Well, a couple ways. One is the strategic goals of this community are to leverage things like their access to a forest and a sawmill, which is done in partnership with this giant timber harvesting and milling company called Western Forest Products. So they're making kind of a Faustian deal with this large industrial extraction economy, that they can develop their own brand and their own kind of wood-based entrepreneurial activities based on that. So, you know, it could go in lots of different directions. I wouldn't say necessarily we're going to focus on, you know, details like connections so much as, I mean, they may come out of the work of the studio, but broadly, that's why I decided that we would, you know, focus solely on wood, because it sort of addresses their own needs and aspirations and makes the work more, I think, informative about where they might take their own directions, whether it's toward developing, you know, SIPS panels or CLT panels, or because they don't have that capacity yet. But if you want to look into the state of the art of wood and then use that as a kind of, for them to see that as a source of inspiration about a modern technical infrastructure, you know, that's kind of how I think of it, more as a form of engagement with their own needs and aspirations, you know. And then of course that has the kind of useful byproduct of kind of limiting the focus of our material investigations around wood. But again, within that is a huge range of possibilities, right? And that's, I mean, I'm interested in both that kind of limiting and that kind of unfolding of possibilities within the limit.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a little bit of a background in mass timber construction, and it is something that I'm interested in. So I just wanted to know, I don't even know what I would want to research on it, but it is like an area of interest.
Well, I've got some ideas about that, but mostly it's about applying, you know, a look at a precedent or two, sort of distilling out of them some principles that you want to inventively transform within the parameters of this relatively modest little public building program and its site, right? So finding a set of inventive possibilities for mass timber is really the point of the precedent work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, I had a question for Chris. Hey Chris, I was wondering if you could elaborate more on the sketch exercises and how that's influencing the final project.
Well, there's the sketch exercises, excuse me. First of all, they exist in a very contained site, which is between two party walls in this peculiar block. And so they they unfold as a series of exercises. The first one is to do with arrival in the sense of transition from the street into the interior. The second one is to do with topography and moving vertically within the site. And the third one is to do with a kind of destination that looks back onto the street. They're very quick, they're a week each, so they're, just get some ideas out. But I think what you'll find is that what you learn from those within the constraints of a party wall infill building are things which will be extremely valuable in trying to think about the standalone building. I don't know, can you be more specific about your query?
I think that was, I just wanted to know more about like what exactly would be doing in the sketch exercises. But
Actually, I should be clear that the difference between the introductory sketch exercises and the larger freestanding building, larger and longer exercise, is that the program per se in the sketch exercises is words like arrival and topography and destination. Whereas the program per se in the freestanding building, the larger building, will be quite specific. It will say, exercise studio of so many square meters, lounge and juice bar of so many square meters, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
So the freestanding building has some issues of orientation that are at your discretion, whereas the infill does not so much. But the infill has a discretion in terms of how you interpret very broad concepts of program, whereas the infill building is much more buttoned down about that side of things.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Joanne and Thina and Chris as well, if you have other things you want to just offer as folks think of things to ask, that's fine as well. If not, that's okay.
Sure, maybe just to maybe give an overview in the way that Chris just gave an overview. There are 3 projects to the term. The first 2 are shorter, they're 2.5 weeks long. And they start, I think we're all very similar in that we're starting with an idea of threshold of arrival, how you might approach a building eventually, but initially, in my case, the context that we're working in. And so it's at the scale of a room, and that's been deliberately picked for the first exercise because you're all in rooms of some sort and have been for a while. And so it's the one thing that you understand in terms of scale very well. It's likely going to be larger than, say, a bedroom, the first project. But as you get to know it and develop it, the idea behind a kind of 1 to 25 inquiry is that it bumps up against the next exercise, which then shifts to the actual covering, I've called it, but it's refers to the floor, wall, roof of the project. And so by dealing with room and dealing with the second part of the first project, we start to develop a spatial sequence, but then we also start to think about material in a very real sense. It's not a Photoshop application on an elevation, it becomes a very real application of the material. And then after reading week, we'll embark upon the bigger project, which will develop further from that initial room and from this kind of detail. And I should say the detail is not just wall section, it's plan detail, elevation detail, wall section that really digs into the spatial and material aspects, and thinking very strongly about how anytime you make something, it influences what's outside of it, which is the farm, and it influences what's inside of it, which is, in my case, the school. So I think that's the kind of trajectory and working with those 3 scales, toggling back and forth throughout the term. I think by the end of it, you'll develop a kind of way of thinking about space and material that is maybe more integrated, that the material is not just applied on at the end. And I think the 4 inputs that Chris spoke about will fold into those lectures quite nicely so that you learn. And I think one of the comments I heard in my exit interviews is, you know, like, how do we organize a plan? How do we organize a section? So all those things are implicit and will be coming forth as we walk through these exercises together.
Great, thank you, Joanne.
My studio also is running a similar trajectory in the sense that we're starting also at the scale of the room, and we're also looking at kind of a lot of elemental features of architecture. So in the first exercise, you know, I will specifically be asking you to think about, you know, the floor, the ceiling, the walls, a chair, or where you might sit. And the first part of the first exercise is also going to be dedicated to some material exploration. So I mentioned that a little bit in my video. All of the model making that we'll be doing in the studio is, they're more like sketch models, and also models that the materials we use are going to be non-precious. So things like, I don't know, like coffee grounds, right? Like how can you take something that's readily available to you, not precious whatsoever, and start to just kind of explore that material and what it might give you. So you can think more like coffee grounds and, like, I don't know, pistachio shells and like cardboard and plastic bags, and less plexiglass and chipboard. For those of you that want to cast, that's an option, but I realize that casting also comes with a lot of in terms of space and just, you know, other materials. Anyway, so that's the first part of the first exercise, and generally similar to Joanne, we're working inside out. So the idea is that you start off with a very kind of accessible and familiar, that being the scale of a room, and then we're gonna like go up and out from there. So hopefully and ideally, all of the lessons and kind of observations that you have in the first exercise, you'll be able to transfer them to the final project. So
Great, thank you. Any other questions, either general about the process? Like I said, Genus and I will go over how voting works. We're planning on doing that in about 5 minutes or so. But if there are no other queries.
So Blair, just one other point I'd like to make is that the extent to which the 4 different options are coordinated. One of them is that the scale and complexity is more or less consistent between the 4. And the intention there is that everybody by the end of this term has a project that they kind of have been able to assess and to kind of make propositions about from soup to nuts. So, you know, maybe it's not down to the design of the doorknob, but you really will have a full and engaged knowledge of many, many aspects of what it is to make a freestanding building. And that's, you know, following on from your introductory studio last term. The intent within our curriculum is that that's a sort of milestone that you have as you finish your first year. And so, notwithstanding the range of projects that's on offer, I just wanted to remind everybody that there's also a kind of consistent aim for accomplishment in each of the proposals.
Great. Thank you. Janus, in the interest of keeping this moving forward, why don't we go ahead and begin to talk about the process of voting, how that all works, what the folks here can expect in terms of, you know, communication, things like that. And then at the end, if there are a few extra minutes and somebody's thought of a question, we'll go ahead and reopen the floor. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So I actually just emailed all of you the link in case you missed it in the chat, or if anyone wasn't here. So the survey link will be up until 6, it's up now. You can fill it out now and it'll be up till 6 p.m. tonight. So it should be pretty straightforward. Just the studios are identified by the last name of the instructor and just shuffle them into the order that you are choosing, one being most, one being your first choice and to 4 being your last choice. And then basically I just take all the data and I sort everyone into studios, trying to take into consideration a few different factors, but one of which is your choices. As Blair said, I always try to get you one of your first choices. That being said, if everyone picks one studio, I obviously can't do that. So I'll try my best. And then they'll be posted on the Miro board tomorrow afternoon before studio. I think it was 12:30 we decided on. Yeah, so that it's pretty simple. And if anyone has any trouble with the ballot, let me know, but I tested it out, so hopefully it functions fine. Has anybody completed it yet? Yeah, it's good. All right, perfect.
Right. And Angela, you're on the call, right? Yeah, I think I see you there.
Good.
Is it the Good Time Space? Angela's the one that's kind of coordinating the reveals. So is it the Good Time Space or is it a special board?
It's a special board. So yeah, keep your eyes out and we'll be sending it out shortly. We're just finishing up the last a few extra details on it. And then and then you might not have access to the board until just before 12:30, depending on when we get the information up, but just keep your eyes out. And then I think like there's sort of like this traditional like Sala culture of everybody kind of freaking out before the reveal and, you know, posting a lot and getting excited. Normally like this would happen in person, and then Jason could probably speak to this, like people just get way too excited. But
yeah, I was just about to explain how, normally I can hear you all on the 3rd floor. I'm on the 4th floor. I can hear everyone screaming and waiting for me to come down with my lists, like everyone waiting to see if they've gotten into the play. And I come in and everyone screams and swarms me, and I post it's very dramatic. So we're trying to sort of emulate that. Angela has tried to sort of emulate that in a virtual way and I kind of like it, but I also kind of hate it. So I'm
Well, you have to wade through the crowd like
yeah, it's very intense.
like you're walking through a bunch of alligators with a chop or something.
Kind of.
Yeah.
So it won't be quite the same, but well, I watched it happen last term and it was pretty cool just to see everyone's little name circling around all the sheets and looking, and it sort of did emulate it somewhat. So hopefully it'll be an interesting experience.
Okay. Any other questions? I feel like either everybody's
I had
already
a
decided
hey
their
Blair, I had
questions
another
or-
one.
Of course. Thanks,
For
Richard.
Joanne, actually. Joanne, I was wondering if you could speak more to the context of the site, on specifically on Innsbruck Place.
Sure. I mean, it's a newer part of the campus. So how many of you are in Vancouver will find out as the sorts happen. But I've taken a ton of photographs of the area, and we're working with UBC right now, or I am with UBC just to get some maps and drawings available to you. So you'll have some base information. If by chance you are in a position where you can visit because you live on campus or are comfortable doing so because you're in Vancouver, it's an area that is, it's like the very new right up against rural. And it's interesting because there's these swaths of second growth forests that they call buffers in the Westbrook Place plan. And it's, they're kind of bizarre, like they're not treated like forests. They're kind of almost like a little object. And so there's a kind of strangeness to the place that I find juxtaposing the farm, which has been there for a long time, and this very new hub of residences, retail. It almost feels a bit like a theme park, like Snow White's gonna like pop out from around the corner to you. Like it's got that kind of feel to it. It's so new materially. It's extremely thin. It's a lot of materials. Like it's a very fussy kind of building style that's going on there. And I think the notion of the outdoor farm school, there is a site that's set aside for an elementary school, and it happens to be directly across from UBC Farm. But the thing that's happened in the last 2 years is there's I think it's something like a 15-story tower that's now right between the school site and the farm. So we have that to negotiate should we choose that site to work with. So I've given the broader context because through the first 2 exercises, I think each of you will discover, is the given site for the elementary school the right one for the outdoor farm school? Should the farm slip out into Westbrook Village and start to encroach upon the university? I think for years I've had this dream that, Main Mall would become vegetated with vegetable gardens that students could pick their lettuces as they go home and stuff like that. But I don't know to what extent we want to take that, but there's a kind of limit to the farm, and there's this kind of like, yes, it's in the forest, but it's actually in a Westbrook Place exists in a large clearing. They call it, they keep referring to it like it's in the trees, but it's not really in the trees. It's kind of surrounded by a little band of trees. And so I think there's a way of making the built environment that the outdoor farm school wants to probe, and how do you do that? And so I would argue that Westbrook Place is very closed in terms of like you can't add to it very easily. You have to add another building, and then you increase this kind of suburban condition of having these strange spaces in between, often filled with manicured bushes that nobody occupies. They're just kind of buffers of sorts. And I guess that's the way the second growth trees are treated. Whereas UBC Farm, when you go there, you can tromp anywhere. I mean, they tell you right off the bat, there's uneven ground, that you need to negotiate many kinds of terrain in order to exist there. So the studio is kind of looking at those kinds of conditions, and then materially how we would resolve a building that might, I think on the one hand, very simply teach a generation that is not connected to food and agriculture and even to the earth, how they connect, how those daily things they do have an effect on the planet. And I think that education just needs to become across the board, because there's a lot of very young, I know my son's elementary school, I mean, half the kids don't even know what a seed is, let alone have planted a seed, which is super sad at this stage. So there's that part of it. And then there's this, an idea that if you act on the land, what does that mean? And how does that help you make a design decision? So a super simple example would be, how do I make a foundation wall? How do I make that if I'm against second growth trees? How do I make that if I'm in the middle of nowhere? Do I use up farmland? Do I not? How do I do it so it's beneficial to both school and farm and to Westbrook Place? What does that mean in that bizarre context there? So I think the first 2 exercises, we may stay back from Westbrook Place a little bit, but the third one, we're going to be fully coming forward and bringing the context to the foreground. I hope that answered your question, Richie.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Sorry, I'm snapping between screens.
Joanne, I have a question for Joanne.
Okay.
Is there any drawback for not being in the Lower Mainland?
I don't think so. The first 2 exercises don't rely on the site stuff as specifically. They do generally, like, am I next to trees? Am I in the farm, for example? Certainly the third one, by that time, I hope to have the drawings, hopefully sooner than that, available. I've already reached out, and hopefully that information is forthcoming. But I don't think there'll be any drawback because I can upload photographs for you guys. We can also use Google Earth, for example, as well as we did in ARC 500. And certainly if anybody who's out of Vancouver feels like they're missing information, I would urge you just to let us know what aspect you feel like you're missing. And I can certainly make other trips out there just to make sure we get all the information we can. The one drawback at the moment is UBC Farm is closed, but they do offer a virtual tour. So I'm in the process of working with them to see if they can give us a virtual tour of the farm, plus answer any questions around plant propagation and, you know, what best practices, those kinds of things are, what happens when you put a building next to a farm. So, you know, one of the things I'm interested in is the idea of microclimate, you know, how that might evolve against a farm.
Great.
Does that help answer
Yeah.
your question?
Yeah,
Jen?
thanks, Joanne.
Yeah, no worries.
Great. Well, we're winding down on time. So if there are any last questions, please, please, please feel free to ask them. Otherwise, we will thank Joanne, Chris, Thina, Janus, and I'll reach back and say thanks to John for being on the call and answering questions. And thanks to all of you for coming in and posing questions for everyone. Like we said, I think 12:30 tomorrow, the information will be up and the feeding frenzy will begin and you'll see what the studios are. And I think the way we were talking about it at the beginning of this call is there will be links either there or provided somehow so that you can go to your respective studio and start class at 1:30. Okay. Great. Thanks, everybody. Welcome back. Happy New Year, and we will see you tomorrow, or at least have information to you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.